Number 10. Lack of imagination. Bobby is actually one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe, and yet people might not always think of him first when it comes to some of the most powerful mutants around. This could be because what often holds Robert Drake back is his own imagination. It turns out Iceman has actually been capable of accomplishing insane feats with his powers, which we've only begun to see in more recent years. He can create sentient ice golems and change not only his own form from ice to water, but others as well. So what has prevented him from doing this in the past? Apparently his lack of imagining that he could. This fact also makes me wonder if this is true for other mutants apart from Bobby. Could all mutants be a lot stronger if they were just a little bit more creative? And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on that bell notification so you don't miss out on any nerdy content. Number 9. Drying out. I'm so glad this is no longer a weakness. For a while there, Aquaman had to be submerged in water periodically, otherwise he would literally dry out. He would also get weaker the longer he was away from water, and of course could even die if he was permanently kept out of water for long enough. And I believe this started affecting him after like an hour of being out of water. Not a lot of time. Number 8. Bug spray. Yep, there have been times when Spider-Man was actually targeted and almost successfully defeated with, you guessed it, bug spray. Because he is a mutate, having had his genes in essence spliced with that of the radioactive spider who bit him, Spider-Man has both the strengths and in some cases the weaknesses of a spider. This not only includes a weakness to bug spray, but also a weakness to cold environments as well. In fact, if you used enough bug spray, you could even permanently defeat Peter Parker by ending his life. That's right, bug spray isn't just a nuisance for Spider-Man, it can actually be downright deadly. Alpha chloride specifically is the substance that Spider-Man finds himself weakened by. When exposed to the substance, it weakens Spider-Man, draining him of his powers and threatening his very life. Number 7. Yellow. The color yellow has to be up there as one of the weirdest weaknesses that we have in comics. For a good long while, this was a weakness shared by all Green Lanterns, especially odd when you consider just how powerful Green Lanterns are considered to be. So why were they weakened by a color? Well, while definitely silly on paper, it actually has to do with the rich history of Green Lantern lore. Green Lantern's opposing emotional color, you see, was yellow, which represents fear in the world of the cosmic emotional spectrum. Because green represents willpower, of course, the only thing that could undermine their abilities would be the emotion of fear. This was also inherently built into the Lanterns, as well as the physical manifestation of fear. Parallax was trapped within the Green Lantern power battery, making this, in essence, a built-in weakness. One that would also serve to consume Hal Jordan, who would ultimately become corrupted by fear, and then later be possessed by Parallax as a result. Number 6. Hold your breath. This was once a weakness that ruled over Kitty Pryde, aka Catherine or Kate Pryde's mutant powers. Initially, Kate could only phase so long as she was holding her breath, which prevented her from phasing indefinitely. However, as time went on, Kate would learn how to manipulate the air in her lungs, which meant that she was eventually free from this weakness, making her a lot more OP today than she once was. Although in my heart, Kate has always been OP, even when she had to hold her breath. Number 5. Self-imposed restrictions. So, Mr. Mixie is just honestly such a weird character in general. I mean, he's an imp from the 5th dimension who basically has limitless power, but mostly uses said powers to just taunt and tease superheroes that, honestly, he kinda admires. He's less a villain and more just like an over-enthusiastic, overpowered fanboy. When you consider this, his weakness actually kinda makes sense, since you know, he is so ridiculous of a character. But on the other hand, when you consider how insanely powerful Mr. Mixie is, his weakness seems pretty insanely easy to exploit. He really only has one weakness, which is if you get him to say or spell his name, Mr. Mxyzptlk, backwards, then he will be forced to leave Earth for 90 days minimum, and all of the effects of his magic will immediately fade. Even stranger is the fact that Mr. Mixie actually chose this as his own weakness, as he is the one who apparently limits his own powers. So he was like, I gotta choose a limit, I'm gonna go with this one. It's very strange, specific, and kind of weird. Number 4. Superpowers. Iska is a super interesting character. On one hand, she is extremely powerful and can never lose. She can even potentially have her power utilized to manipulate the stakes of other competitions that she is pulled into. However, this also implies that there are times when she has zero control over her powers, in the sense that she cannot influence the result of an unbalanced battle, or that she can be used to give someone else, a rival or even an enemy, the upper hand by including her in a wager or a fight. Her powers force whatever side she is on to become victorious, regardless of whether or not she even wants that to happen. This has meant that Iska has been forced to turn her back on her own people, the mutants of Arakko, more than once. She has also had to fight against family, colleagues, and friends before as a result. Which, I don't know, if you ask me, that kind of sounds like a weakness because you gotta live with that, so that would kind of suck. You always win, but at what cost? Number 3, organic materials. Power Girl probably has one of the weirdest weaknesses around in comics. Despite being a Kryptonian, and sometimes an Atlantean, depending on the time period and version of the character we're talking about, who is on the level of Superman when it comes to her powers and her strength, she can easily be harmed simply if you use organic materials to hurt her. You know that saying about sticks and stones may break your bones? Well, for Power Girl, despite having super durability, this is actually true. Sticks and stones could break her bones, but industrial steel probably wouldn't for some reason. Fortunately, Kara no longer has this weakness anymore, but for an embarrassing little while in the 90s, she did, so. Number 2, power inhibitors. Remy LeBeau often seems to be considered an underrated X-Men. He can create massive explosions using kinetic energy, which he focuses on an object that is charged by his touch and explodes. Typically prefers playing cards just because they're fast to charge, but he could charge really big stuff if he wanted to. He also has great control over his powers, but there is something you might have noticed in the comics when it comes to his power set. He never seems to charge people or any organic life forms. What's up with that? For many, they might just think that Gambit chooses not to because, well, he's ultimately a hero, although this rule isn't always consistently applied, as sometimes writers do forget about it. But if you were wondering why, for the most part, Gambit can't charge living beings, it's actually because of Mr. Sinister. Gambit made a deal with Sinister to operate on his brain in order to help him control his powers more, while also limiting them so that he doesn't basically go haywire and kill everyone he loves. This means his own weakness in regard to the use of his abilities is actually kinda self-imposed. Number 1, Red Kryptonite. Red Kryptonite has to be one of the goofiest weaknesses to have ever existed in all of comic book history. I know that's a bold statement to some, but I honestly stand by it. Why is Red Kryptonite so dumb? Well, because it's completely unpredictable. It's like chaos incarnate when it comes to Superman weaknesses. This is because it was stated that each piece of Red Kryptonite had different effects. In fact, it was also suggested that after 24 to 48 hours of a particular effect taking hold, it would subside. But if exposed to the same piece of Red Kryptonite again, a Kryptonian would become victim to a whole different side effect for some reason. But then it has also been stated that once a Kryptonian is affected by a piece of Red Kryptonite, that whole piece is rendered powerless and can't be used against them ever again. Basically, Red Kryptonite is a bundle of contradictions, mainly used as a plot device to do whatever the writer needs to do to Superman for their story. List of side effects includes, but are not limited to, power loss, turning evil, excessive hair growth, blindness to all things green, insanity, and turning into a dragon. Number 10, his own hubris. In the 2000 Spider-Man films, we saw Norman Osborn meet his end in the stupidest of ways. For a villain that even in the film franchise is supposed to be a genius and a master manipulator, this was honestly, I gotta be real with you, a pretty dumb move. He and Spider-Man are having a standoff and he comes up with the brilliant idea mid-fight to finish off Spider-Man by impaling him with his glider. Norman, please. You would think this would be a brilliant plan, except for the part where it's, well, not. You see, the problem is that Green Goblin is just behind Spider-Man, meaning that the glider would impale him too. This becomes more of an issue when he goes for it and Spider-Man, possessing, you know, Spidey sense and being pretty quick to react to an attack, just jumps out of the way, leaving Green Goblin in the way of his own glider and resulting in him impaling himself and dying. Nice one, Norman. I mean, you can't even blame Spider-Man for that one, that's just you did that to yourself. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us, feed that algorithm by clicking that like button. Number 9. Always wins. Iska isn't necessarily a villain in the comics, but she has leaned that way in some more recent stories in the last few years. Initially, she was on the side of Arakko, which, while not inherently bad, were fighting against the mutants of Krakoa, of Earth, and also were allied with the Daemons of Amenth. So yeah. She also turned her back on her own people when Uranos came to attack Mars, which became the new home of the Iraqi mutants, known as Planet Arakko. And this apparently wasn't the first time that she'd done something like that. The interesting thing about Iska, like some others on our list, is that her powers are in fact her own weakness at times, as long as someone is smart enough to know how to best use them against her. That is what we see in her fight against the Fisher King. You see, Iska always has to win, whether it's in a bet, a fight, or simply a debate of wills. In this case, the Fisher King challenged her to a battle of understanding loss, and since she has to win, this caused Iska to feel the loss of all that her powers had caused her to give up with her victories, forcing her to feel emotionally defeated and thereby remove herself from the Great Ring of Arakko, ultimately giving the Fisher King what he wanted, and so in that way, he beat her at his own game. Number 8. Overcomplicated plans. While Lex Luthor might be the most brilliant Superman villain in the comics, his film adaptation leave much to be desired, and it is for this reason that he made our cut. Don't believe me? Well, you might need to rewatch Batman v Superman, which paints him as the villain behind the showdown between the two heroes who are usually portrayed as being BFFs, normally, in the main continuity at least of the comics, instead of making the president the one who issues the order to make them fight, and more revolve around their different ideologies of Batman sort of going a little crazy in his old age, which is what we got in the comics, and it makes I would say some more sense. Lex's plot here is so intricate and so haphazardly built on hoping that people will make the move that he anticipates. I mean, you could argue that Lex is just that good at reading and manipulating people, but I'd wager that it's more likely that he's just honestly lucky here. If he was really a genius, he probably would have made the plan, I don't know, more direct. Less room for things to go wrong. Just kidnap Martha and make them fight already. And let's not forget that Lex has no real motivation for this plan either. At the very least, not Batman's involvement. And let's not forget in the 2000s when all Lex Luthor's plans just revolved around real estate. That was also a weird time. Number 7. Mirrors. Mirror Master is actually a pretty powerful villain for being one of the more gimmicky Flash villains we have. He often either comes equipped with his own mirror gun or powers related to the mirror dimension. These powers over the years have had a variety of different effects. He can disguise himself, look into past events that mirrors have witnessed, trap people in mirrors, and even move through mirrors at times, depending on the version of the character and the story that we're talking about. But while this has been a power set for him, it's also been used against him as a weakness. In modern comics, Mirror Master ended up getting his weapon blended with his genes, which gave him mirror-based superpowers. Honestly, sounds pretty great. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good thing at first, as he ended up just trapped in the mirror dimension with no possible way out. At least initially that's what happened. So in that case, his own power kind of became his own weakness. Number 6. Bad planning. Dr. Doom, aka Victor Von Doom, has had a slew of great plans, to be fair, but he has also had a slew of, well, honestly, terrible ones. One particularly ridiculous plan that proves just how dumb the usual genius-level intellect supervillain can be involved him swapping bodies with Daredevil. This plan could have been great, except it mostly just involves Dr. Doom messing with Daredevil, including a part involving a room that is giant-sized, set up as a test to prove that Daredevil is worthy of the planned body swap. Doom's plan seems to be to use Daredevil's connection to the Fantastic Four to do something. Defeat them, I guess? I would think? We never really get there. Daredevil handily defeats Doom while in his body by threatening to start a war between Latveria and China. Doom knows this would not end well and agrees to basically swap back. Oh, and apparently Dr. Doom also doesn't seem to notice that Daredevil is blind even when he's in his body. So, I guess because he has his superpowers, I don't know. Number 5. Wood. Does this weakness sound ridiculous to you? Because it certainly does to me. When you think of a superhero, you usually think of someone who is capable of defeating your common run-of-the-mill criminal in a single punch. We think of beings who can fly and shoot laser beams from their eyes, who are impervious to damage from even some of the most dramatic blows. And then there is the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, with his weakness to wood. Why did Alan Scott initially have this weakness? Well, there have been a few reasons that have been used in an attempt to explain this. One is that as a lantern, he was simply only invulnerable to metals, so wood was just something that wasn't a thing he was invulnerable to. Another is related to a conflict with the previous Green Lantern who wielded the lantern and was an alien who misused his powers, and as such, Alan was simply punished as a result of that previous Green Lantern's folly, because he has his lantern. There was another reason that said the wood weakness came from the fact that the Green Lantern came from green glowing things, and as such couldn't, or wouldn't, be used to do harm to its own kind, which would be wood, trees, nature, that kind of thing. Another still was explained as Alan's own fear of being knocked in the back of the head with a wooden club, which happened on his first outing, and that was the reason why. It was like a built-in fear, he had to overcome it. But either way you slice it, the idea that an all-powerful being like Green Lantern could be defeated with a baseball bat, it's pretty silly, let's be real. Number 4, not actually the smartest. Ozymandias, aka Adrian Veidt's villainous scheme to kill millions in order to obtain world peace honestly seems brilliant on paper. His fellow heroes never saw it coming, and he only reveals his plot after it had already taken place, being sure to cover his tracks as he went. He applauds himself and thinks he is the smartest man in the world. Even the rest of the Watchmen decide they may as well join him, except Rorschach. As such, Ozymandias underestimates his potential opponents, and Rorschach actually gets the better of him, despite Manhattan killing him. Beforehand, he was smart enough to send his journal with his findings surrounding Adrian's plans to the news. They decided to publish the information and expose Veidt for the villain he is, undoing everything he set out to accomplish and sending him into hiding. So while he may claim to be the smartest man on Earth, Rorschach still seems to somehow have outsmarted him. Number 3, illusions that aren't solid. Mastermind can create powerful illusions, ones that feel, smell, sound, taste, and look completely real. For example, if he creates a wall, it will feel like a wall. But if you can overcome how convincing the illusion seems mentally, if you just decide to run through that wall, I mean, it isn't actually there, so it's not a solid construct. And his illusions can only exist as long as you actually believe them to be true. They require you to believe, so once you shatter one of his illusions, basically all the others will just come tumbling down after. Jason Wingard also has to concentrate for you to see his illusions, so many people have taken him out in a battle simply by distracting him momentarily. He also can't control who sees them and who doesn't. If he creates a giant butterfly in a room, all who are in the room with it will see it. Anyone who has it within their line of sight, which can sometimes work at a disadvantage for him. Number 2, showboating. Granted, Magneto isn't intended to really be a villain in this storyline, but either way, he still acts pretty dumb and does some questionable things. This story of course comes to us not from the comics, but from Days of Future Past, the X-Men movie, where we see Wolverine go back in time to try to prevent the post-apocalyptic events of the future, which is really his past. Anyways, time travel is confusing. Magneto is trying to help prevent this future as well, and aims to kill Mystique in order to do so before an event can take place where she is caught on camera and basically terrifies all of humankind, causing the huge war between humans and mutants, which leads us of course to the future, which is, like I said, Wolverine's past in his mind. When this fails, Magneto decides to take control of Trask's Sentinels and have them kill the president. Not a terrible idea, until he decides to fly in and drop a stadium on the lawn of the White House and confess publicly on television that he, a mutant, was responsible for all of this destruction. Wasn't the whole point of you trying to do this initial plan to avoid what you just did? Magneto, please. Number 1, her own suit. Asbestos Lady's own suit is made out of fireproof material, but that material is, well, asbestos. This is why Asbestos Lady would later on actually die, because of her own suit, which was also said to give her cancer. Of course, Asbestos Lady was a product of her time, which is why her suit was made out of this material, which back then we didn't actually know was that dangerous, so sadly her weakness is kind of just a product of the time period.
Number 10, Martian Manhunter and fire. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America, number 255. Number 9. The Flash and being too fast. At first, I've gotta say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedsters their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of the Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4. Number 8. Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which in her defense would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5. Number 7. Adam Strange and Forced Deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Rann and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in Mystery in Space, and it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Rann is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Rann, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Rand's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, the Rannians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6. Number 6. Human Torch and Asbestos. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe-to-toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please, don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story, starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1. Number 5. Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, Number 8. Number 4. Gladiator and Self-Confidence. Kal-Ark, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be. However, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1977's X-Men number 107. Number 3. Daredevil and Loud Noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted, and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1. Loud noises! Number 2. Green Lantern and Wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns, it's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log, and then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940's All-American Comics number 16. Number 1. Captain Marvel Jr. and His Own Name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.
Number 10. Hope Summers. Hope is one of those mutants who has become problematic for writers because she is just so powerful. She can adopt any other mutant's powers, and there is no limit to how many power sets she can use at once. She doesn't drain the powers from them like Rogue, simply mimics them, but she also gains the peak performance level of their powers as well. And she doesn't have to touch someone to use their abilities, so that's a plus side to one of her weaknesses, I guess. So, how do we cap someone like that? How do we make her writable and relatable? Well, usually we make her feel conflicted and want to run away. We've all wanted to run away at some point, right? But for weaknesses, they could have made it a certain ability, a certain power that she just can't use and can drastically cause her harm as a result or something like that. But nope, she's the mutant messiah after all, so instead her weakness is distance. And time, to an extent. So in other words, the easiest way to defeat Hope is just run away from her. If she can't get to you and you have enough distance between you and her, then she can't really mimic your abilities. And really, distance is her only main weakness. Well, unless she gets her hands on a teleporter's abilities, because then she'd have to teleport away from the teleporter, and if she teleports too far away from them, how can she use their abilities? Wait a minute, I feel like this is a weakness that wasn't fully thought through. How does she use teleportation abilities? Does she have to take teleporter with her? What? Number 9, Wolverine. Logan is definitely one of the most popular mutants, if not the most popular, and known for being one of the coolest and toughest mutants out there. So, what's he doing on this list? Well, not everything about him is as cool as you think, but one thing especially, that is his weakness to magnets. Now, granted, this makes sense. His adamantium skeleton is one of his greatest strengths, although likely it can be his greatest weakness in a way, as in old age it kind of poisons him. But beyond that, it also becomes a weakness when he comes up against anyone with magnetic powers, namely, you guessed it, Magneto. Magneto actually once used his power to rip the adamantium out of Wolverine. Ouch. Actually, I feel like he maybe has done this more than once in the comics, proving just how deadly this weakness can be for Logan. While it's no joke, and it does make sense, it just sounds ridiculous, and it makes me think of Wolverine falling to his knees if we were just to cover him in fridge magnets. And I know we'd likely need something stronger than fridge magnets to cause him harm, but still, this imagery is pretty hysterical to me. So if you think of Wolverine's weakness to magnets, it makes sense, but it just sounds ridiculous on paper. Weaknesses, magnets. Number 8, Nate Gray. Nate Gray might be insanely powerful and be able to do pretty much anything, but there is one guy who can cause him some serious harm. That's his kind of alternate version of himself / weird multiverse half-brother, Cable. Nathan Summers. Because these two share such an identical size signature, being in one another's presence actually severely messes with both of them. It causes their powers to go slightly haywire, forcing them to randomly share memories with one another, and even causes them visible pain. This is an especially odd weakness, considering that this doesn't really happen with any of the other alternates, or any of their other alternates, including Cable's evil clone, Strife. I think if it's gonna happen with Nate Gray, shouldn't it happen with Strife? Nor does it seem to be a common occurrence among any other alternates in the Marvel Universe. So, very strange. Number 7, Magik. Magik's main weakness is her own emotions. She is capable of both good magic and dark magic, and when she feels intense emotions, if she gives in to it, it can actually turn her dark, transforming her into her Darkchild persona, a sort of demonic and somewhat evil version of herself. So she's got similar problems to DC's Raven, of having to be careful about how strongly she feels about something. Having to not feel emotions as intensely for fear of what you do is about as serious as it is ridiculous. These weaknesses in comics seem to be given to the most powerful characters, because how else do you make them relatable and at least somehow defeatable? I mean, when Magik actually has all of her magical abilities, she's pretty OP. Number 6, Kitty Pryde, or Captain Kate as she's going by now, has a weird weakness in the sense that her powers are kind of also her weakness. Okay, hear me out. So, for one, she used to have the restriction, and still sometimes does, I think, depending on who is writing her, that she has to hold her breath while phasing. Now, fortunately, this has pretty much been changed because her powers have increased, and it was really pretty silly. Like, she has to hold her breath, yet she does all of these things. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. In fact, I think it was such a silly restriction on her powers that Marvel realized, oh, we should maybe change this. But beyond that, as useful as her powers are, they have also gotten her into trouble. So they're both a pro and a con in a way, like when she managed to phase into that giant bullet but found herself unable to phase back out due to the material that the bullet was made of and how thick it was. And yet, that material that prevented her from phasing out did not prevent her from phasing into the bullet and phasing her and the entire bullet through the planet Earth. So what is up with that? Also, is that bullet made out of adamantium? Because I couldn't find anything about that, but I know that Kitty Pryde has an issue with adamantium. So I'm just wondering. If anyone knows, let me know. Number 5, Cyclops. While Scott is trained to have great control over his powers, he's nothing without his visor, or his more casual sunglasses if we're talking about the film starring James Marsden as Cyclops. The ruby quartz lenses, or long single lens, help Scott to see without having to worry about shooting everyone up with his optic blasts, while his combat visor also allows him to direct his optic blasts in more specific ways, controlled by a ton of buttons that are in his gloves that allow him to change the mirrors and the screen in his visor so that he can manage all kinds of masterful targeting when it comes to taking down enemies. But if he loses his glasses or his visor, he actually can't see because he has to keep his eyes closed, and his powers become more of a hazard than an asset. This has rendered him useless before in battle and made him terrified to harm those he loves, his fellow X-Men and his longtime love, Jean Grey. I've also wondered if him seeing red means you could use this to your advantage when fighting Cyclops and find a way to sneak up on him, like if you had really good red camouflage made. So like he wouldn't see you. He'd be like, all I see is red. Where's that person? Number 4, Rogue. Rogue's main weakness is actually herself. Later on in her story, we learn that it is actually Rogue's own fear that holds her back. Her abilities could be controlled if she simply wasn't so afraid of them. Her first kiss with Cody Robbins, which left him in a coma, ended up being the event that created this fear in her and allowed her to believe that she was dangerous for the rest of her life, and as such, she became dangerous. Some self-actualization stuff going on in her story. But once she overcomes this fear, she is actually granted more control over her powers. Now, while I love this story and journey for her, especially because it's kind of relatable if you're the type of person to self-doubt, the revelation of this weakness also changes her character a lot. For a lot of people, the struggle of being so powerful yet so dangerous is what people really love about Rogue. How she is tormented by the fact that she is basically forced to live a life of full-on social distancing, 24/7. So for it to have all been in her head, it feels a little bit like a cop-out. Years of torment could have apparently been avoided if Rogue had just believed in herself more. Number 3, Iceman. Bobby is actually one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvelverse, and yet people might not always think of him when it comes to some of the most powerful mutants around. This is because what often holds Robert Drake back is his own imagination. Iceman has actually been capable of accomplishing insane feats with his powers, and may have been capable of that the entire time. He can create sentient ice golems and change not only his own form from ice to water, but he can also do that to others as well. What has prevented him from this? Well, his lack of imagination that he could do it. This fact also makes me wonder if this is true for other mutants apart from Bobby. Like, could all mutants just be a lot stronger if they were just more creative? Or in Rogue's case, if they believed in themselves more? Do they need to train less at Xavier's school and simply just take more elective arts courses and expand their minds? Or maybe some more therapy courses, deal with their stuff. Number 2, Gambit. Remy LeBeau often seems to be considered an underrated X-Men. He can create massive explosions using kinetic energy, which he focuses on an object that is charged by his touch and then explodes. He also has great control over his powers. He can charge something with kinetic energy and actually time that explosion, but there are 2 things that you might have noticed in the comics when it comes to his character. He never seems to charge people or any other organic life forms. So what's up with that? For many, they might just think that Gambit actually chooses not to because, you know, he's a good guy. But it has been debated in the comics that this idea of charging living matter might not even be an option for Gambit. So he can charge anything basically non-living, but nothing that is alive. This is also a weakness that sometimes seems to be forgotten by writers, as it's not been completely consistent or fully explained. So sometimes he can do it, which is weird. And despite the amazing control that he exhibits, this was actually something granted to him by Mr. Sinister. Gambit actually made a deal with Sinister to operate on his brain in order to help him control his powers more, while also kind of limiting them so he doesn't basically go haywire and kill everyone he loves. The results of the surgery are both, of course, a strength and a weakness, as they granted Gambit more control while also limiting his powers somewhat. Also, making deals with Mr. Sinister is just usually ill-advised. The fact that that even happened in a comic with Gambit, It's strange. Number 1. Mastermind. Mastermind can create powerful illusions, ones that feel, smell, sound, taste, and look completely real. For example, if he creates a wall, it will feel like a wall, it'll smell like a wall, it'll taste like a wall. But if you can overcome how convincing this illusion seems, if you can just decide to run through that wall, you'll realize it isn't actually there. And his illusions can only exist as long as you believe them to be true. They require you to believe. So once you shatter one of his illusions, all the others will just come tumbling down after. Jason Wingard also has to concentrate for you to be able to see his illusion. So many people have taken him out in battle simply by distracting him momentarily. He also cannot control who sees his illusions and who doesn't. For example, if he creates a giant butterfly in a room, all who are in the room with it will see it. Anyone who has it within their line of sight will see it. In fact, you could say his weaknesses appear greater than his strengths in a lot of ways. Kind of a weird villain like that. Also, sometimes he's super powerful, sometimes he's not that powerful at all.
Coming in at number 10 today, it's Luke Cage's impenetrable skin. Thanks to the super soldier experiment known as the Burstein process, Luke Cage Power Man does have incredible strength, stamina, and a healing factor, but he is pretty much most known for the fact that he is protected by indestructible, impenetrable, super dense skin. That is an awesome power to have. Luke is protected from almost anything with this titanium-like skin, but the problem here is that this natural shield isn't just shielding him from the outside. Whenever Luke Cage is internally injured, which is rarely, the character requires more than almost anyone else ever would. It's next to impossible to perform surgery on Luke Cage unless you happen to have access to an overpowered medical laser. The natural ways someone might be healed from some kind of internal injury do not apply, as doctors can't even cut through Cage's skin to begin the procedure in the first place. As you can imagine, this can be pretty problematic.
In at 950 50% off sales. Captain Margaret Elizabeth, or Peggy Carter, was a distinguished Avenger and founding member of the Illuminati, who played a crucial role in the Infinity War of 2018 of our world, where she valiantly fought against Thanos and aided during the Battle of Titan. In the aftermath, when Doctor Strange utilized the Darkhold for dreamwalking, resulting in a multiversal threat of, incursions, Carter, along with the rest of the Illuminati, voted in favor of executing him to safeguard their universe. In the years that followed, Carter found herself residing over a hearing concerning an alternate version of Doctor Strange who was apprehended by Baron Mordo on suspicions of posing a similar danger. Before the vote could be finalized though, to condemn this alternate Doctor Strange, their headquarters came under attack by the Scarlet Witch. Carter and her fellow Illuminati confronted her, but tragically she met her demise when Scarlet Witch used her own shield to cut her in half, hence the 50% off sale. The amount of times that Cap has caught his shield though makes me question why Carter was able to be cut in half by hers.
Number 8. Chickens, or electorophobia. The mutant Domino is pretty darn unique. Her mutant ability allows her to subliminally and psionically initiate random kinetic phenomena that affect probability in her favor by making improbable, but importantly not impossible, things to occur within her line of sight. What does that mean? Basically she has good luck. Really good luck. So how do you give a weakness to someone with such a strange and honestly powerful power as luck? Easy. You make her absolutely terrified of chickens. Now, obviously not a lot of people are running across chickens very often, and I think that holds true for superheroes, but for someone with such super powered luck as Domino, she runs into chickens more than should be acceptable, and that's pretty unlucky because her fear of chickens is quite debilitating.
In its 7, chewing gum. The Justice Buster Batsuit is a mech suit that's part of Batman's Fenrir contingency, which is designed to take down the entirety of the Justice League if they were to turn bad. Making its feature appearance in Batman Endgame, when the Joker used his virus to warp the brains of the Justice League at the beginning of this Endgame plot, Batman was forced to use the Fenrir protocol to eliminate the teammates, or well, to at least subdue them. The suit was successful in eliminating Wonder Woman, The Flash, and Aquaman, but met an even match at the hands of Superman. After a lengthy fight, Superman tore through the armor and nearly killed Batman until Bruce used kryptonite chewing gum to spit in Clark's face, rendering him unconscious. Come on, okay? Imagine waking up to learn that you passed out because Batman spit on your face. Seriously, please, brush your tongue, okay? You get one of those tongue scrapers. Your breath is lethal. Not to mention the miniaturized red suns for Knuckles, they didn't help. You had to spit kryptonite chewing gum.
Number 6. Ethyl chloride. Ethyl chloride, a common compound found in pesticides and bug sprays, is essentially Spider-Man's kryptonite, and it severely impairs his senses. This makes ethyl chloride extremely powerful against Spider-Man. It's one of his biggest weaknesses, but yet ethyl chloride isn't being used by all of his villains all the time, even though it's actually a very common compound. The big reason why it doesn't show up much is that ethyl chloride is considered to be so supremely powerful against Spider-Man that there was a momentary ban placed on the substance by Marvel writers. It was literally becoming too easy to bring down Spidey, so writers got lazy and used it as a crutch just way too many times. Amazing Spider-Man number 106 has Spider-Man engaging in battle with the Spider Slayer Mark IV, which had the villainous edition of ethyl chloride. After trapping Spider-Man in a web, Smythe, the guy who created it, uses his machine to douse Peter with a cloud of the compound, and Spider-Man is weakened by the spray and finds himself unable to move, giving his enemies the chance to strike.
Halfway through into number 5, breathing. If I said Batman vs. Hulk, I think we should all agree, unless you're in denial, on the outcome, right? Talk about a one-sided fight. Batman standing up to Superman is one thing, they share a universe, he can get kryptonite, whatever. But Batman and the Hulk? No. Unfortunately though, they have gone toe-to-toe, and surprisingly, Batman achieved the impossible feat of defeating Hulk. In the harmonious days of 1981, when DC and Marvel were on friendly terms and the concept of separate universes hadn't really come to fruition, they occasionally collaborated on crossover stories. One such amusing tale unfolded in DC Special Series number 27, written by the late Len Wein and illustrated by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. In the extraordinary encounter, Batman unexpectedly crossed paths with a rampaging Hulk, manipulated by the Joker to view Batman as a villain. The Hulk turned his fury towards the Caped Crusader, and Batman, recognizing the immense power of his opponent, somehow skillfully evaded Hulk's fists with every move, because, you know, one hit would kill him. With calculated precision, Batman then deployed a pellet of knockout gas, which was disorienting the Hulk, but, you know, not knocking him out because it's the Hulk. Exploiting a moment of weakness, Batman incapacitated the Jade Giant by kicking him in the gut, forcing Hulk to inhale. That's right, yeah, Batman kicked Hulk in the gut and actually made him flinch.
Number 4, Asbestos. Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, was one of my favorite superheroes as a kid. He can create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome. His Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, except of course for asbestos. Now, thankfully in our modern world we know that asbestos is pretty incredibly toxic and it's totally banned across most of the world. But you see, back when the Human Torch was first created in 1963, it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. And the Human Torch was wide open to asbestos-based attacks. Specifically though, the Torch has found himself going up against villains based on the stuff, Asbestos Lady and Asbestos Man. Both of these villains made use of asbestos-based outfits or armor and tools of the trade. But like I said, we know this stuff to be incredibly toxic, but we didn't know that then. So as time went on, Asbestos Lady, aka Victoria Murdoch, passed on from idiopathic mesothelioma at age 45, presumably from asbestos exposure, and Asbestos Man was forced to start wearing an oxygen mask and presumably also passed on due to his asbestos exposure. I guess they also had a weakness to the stuff, huh? R.I.P. R.I.P. in the chat.
Getting close to the end of number 3, bullets! Now, with the Flash being the fastest man alive, you'd expect him to, you know, be able to react to things. And while this weakness isn't exactly showcased with the Scarlet Speedster in a meaningful way, it is certainly demonstrated well by his counterpart, the Reverse Flash. Imagine our surprise when Reverse Flash ends up getting popped in the head by none other than Thomas Wayne in the Flashpoint timeline so that Barry could access enough Speed Force to save the world and bring his son back. Batman shot Reverse Flash in the head. And while this apparently killed Thawne, that was far from the end of the story, because Thawne started vibrating as fast as he could to slow the destruction of his brain. This gave him more time to avoid death and gave him the ability to hold a grudge. But seriously, shooting a speedster in the head has to be one of the dumbest ways a speedster has been defeated. And that's including the entirety of the Flash TV series, even the final season where he shakes hands with the negative Speed Force.
Number 2, yellow. Never eat the yellow snow. It's a rule that a lot of us know. While that may be a statement made to stop small children from consuming human or animal pee, I think it would be a perfect saying to introduce into the Green Lantern Corps. Hal Jordan has protected the Earth from interplanetary carry threats with his incredibly powerful ring and his incredibly powerful will. And yet, you face him armed with a handful of buttercups and he is rendered practically useless. According to the comics, an impurity in the ring's power source meant that Jordan became powerless when faced with the color yellow. This was later expanded by Geoff Johns' Green Lantern Rebirth as being tied to Parallax, a yellow fear entity who was locked in the central power battery, thus weakening it. Now, when you say it like that, it begins to make, I guess, a little bit more sense, but before this was revealed though, Green Lantern's weakness was just dumb. And it still kind of is. This is no more evident than in All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller. Specifically issue number 9, when the Caped Crusader trapped Hal Jordan in a yellow painted room and let a yellow suited Robin go to town on him. And this is all because it's the dumbest weakness we have ever heard of. Bruce Wayne said it himself, so it has to be true.
And it was all yellow. And finally, in at number 1, Wood. Wow, look at that. Green Lantern number 1 and number 2. Throughout the years, Green Lantern has encountered various weaknesses tied to his powers, okay, like yellow. But one particular vulnerability has been overlooked by most comic writers, mostly because it's specific to the Alan Scott version. Green Lanterns, they use their powers, they use them to fly, communicate in different languages, create energy constructs, or will constructs, I guess, because, you know, green. But you know, you have to balance it out somehow. So in Alan Scott's case, wood was the chosen weakness. It has an explanation, and it stems from the subconscious belief that his abilities couldn't affect the material, and that's literally it. He didn't have the belief that he could do anything to wood, so he couldn't, which just showcases that belief is the most powerful superpower of all, unless you're facing against a number 2 pencil, which I guess would actually take out both of them.
Number 10. Batman's inability to trust. For a superhero with no powers, Batman is able to do remarkably well against much more powerful villains, and is able to stand next to some of the most powerful heroes in the DC universe without looking out of place. And while yes, technically you could count the fact that he's susceptible to being shot or stabbed as a weakness, his greatest weakness is his inability to trust anyone, even his closest allies. Batman is constantly finding himself in situations where he doesn't give his allies the full picture, and as a result, he or his teammates are put in unnecessary danger. The most famous example of this comes from the Tower of Babel storyline, when it was revealed that Batman had developed detailed plans about how to destroy each of his friends and teammates. Ra's al Ghul managed to steal these plans and do a lot of damage to the heroes before Batman realized what was happening. Frankly, it is only through dumb luck that none of the League members were killed in this incident. When the dust settled, the team was furious with Batman for breaching their trust and putting all of them in danger. As the writer of the story, Mark Waid, recently said in an interview where he talked about this arc, Batman's sin to the Justice League was not that he had these plans to counteract each of them. It was that he didn't tell them. If he had just said to Superman, listen, just in case you want to know, I have a backup in case you ever go nuts, Superman would go, awesome, that's good to hear. This is a lesson that Batman has yet to really absorb, despite the amount of times his secrecy has blown up in his face, such as when he kept the Batman Who Laughs prisoner under the Hall of Justice without telling anyone. Number 9. Zatanna has to be able to speak. Zatanna is a stage magician who happens to be capable of real magic. She is capable of casting powerful enchantments that can range from turning enemies into rabbits or erasing their memories. She casts these spells by saying what she wants backwards. For example, when she wants to turn rain into flowers, she says Niar Semo Keb Suru Wolf. The one limitation on this power is that to cast these spells, she has to be able to speak the incantations. So, unlike other magic-wielding characters like, say, Doctor Strange, who could cast a spell by wordlessly waving their hands, if someone manages to gag Zatanna, she is incapable of doing anything to further defend herself, as happened when she was captured by the Joker, who slit her throat and threw her into a water tank. However, she was eventually able to heal herself by using blood magic and writing the spell backwards in her own blood. Number 8. Daredevil's radar sense gets confused. When Matt Murdock was a young boy, he was hit by a truck that was carrying a radioactive isotope. This isotope got in his eyes and blinded him, but also heightened his other senses, allowing him to develop his trademark radar sense, which helps him navigate the world and fight crime as Daredevil. While this does give him several advantages, it is also prone to being overstimulated by kinda random things. For example, if he ends up underwater, he can easily lose his bearings and have trouble telling up from down. Even worse though is his weakness to rain. This weakness is kinda inconsistent, as in other versions of the character, like the Ben Affleck movie, rain allows him to see things more clearly, but in the comics it is a serious handicap for the character. In issue 25 of the 2011 Daredevil series, Matt is fighting a villain named Ikari who has a similar radar sense. The fight leads them to a sporting goods store where Matt's narration reveals that he has always been worried that a villain will someday think to use a sprinkler system against him, as rain negates his sense of smell, overwhelms his hearing, and makes his radar sense practically useless, cutting his by 95%. Considering how often it seems to rain in Marvel's New York and how dependent Daredevil is on his radar sense, this is a pretty rough weakness.
Number 7. Wonder Woman. One of Wonder Woman's original weaknesses seems to be in line with what she represents as a character: female power and strength. As an Amazon, Wonder Woman was initially also susceptible to losing her strength and power if she was ever restrained by a man. While some might see this as kind of a sexist weakness in the comics, I would actually see it as kind of being the opposite. To me, it's more meant to symbolize a history of oppression against women and its consequences. At least that's how I see that weakness. However, regardless of any greater meaning behind it, it was also a pretty silly weakness in the sense that it made Wonder Woman fairly easy to defeat under certain circumstances, and if she was going up against men, because if they just found her bracelets, that's kinda it. So I do have to say I'm glad this is no longer a rule for her in the comics today.
Number 6. Wolverine's metal skeleton. Wolverine has always been a powerful mutant sporting claws and a healing factor that makes him practically unkillable. Between that and his super acute senses, his more than a century of combat training, and his berserker rage, he is not someone you want as an enemy. These abilities got an upgrade when the Weapon X program got a hold of him and coated his skeleton and claws with an indestructible metal called adamantium. While this does make him even more durable, it does come with certain drawbacks. For example, it does make it much more difficult for Wolverine to swim, and foes often take advantage of this, trapping the clawed Canadian underwater and making him experience the feeling of drowning until he manages to escape. The other drawback to this, of course, is that it makes him vulnerable to magnetism. While this wouldn't be too bad of a weakness for most heroes, I mean, how often do you really come across a giant magnet in the world? Wolverine has the misfortune of being a member of the one superhero team that is constantly fighting against a character who is able to manipulate metal with his mind. At best, this makes him immobile for most of the encounters against Magneto, and at worst, it results in him getting his skeleton torn out. Number 5. Snowbird can't leave Canada. When the Inuit goddess of the Northern Lights, Nelvana, needed an agent on Earth to help prevent the return of the evil mystical great beasts, she mated with a human and had the shaman, Michael Two Young Men, use his magic to help deliver the child on Earth. Naria was given a decent grab bag of powers, the most notable of which is the ability to transform into any creature found in the Canadian Arctic. She has used this power to become owls, bears, and even whales, which makes her a formidable force against her enemies. However, due to Shaman not being specific enough when casting the spell that bound her spirit to the land, she is somewhat limited in where she can go. If Snowbird goes or is taken beyond the Canadian borders, she grows weak and sick. The longer she is out of Canada, the weaker she gets, and if she stays out of the country too long, she could even die. This weakness was discovered in Alpha Flight number 12 when the team learned that their leader, Guardian, had walked into a trap set by the evil Omega Flight in New York and teleported to his location to try and save him. Snowbird immediately became emaciated and old and nearly died, and was therefore more of a hindrance than a help in this scenario. Snowbird died in a later comic and was eventually brought back, and as a result, this weakness seems to have disappeared, as she has since traveled outside of Canada and has even left the planet without any ill effects. Number 4. Martian Manhunter and his addiction. John Jones is an alien from the planet Mars who has insanely strong telepathic powers that allow him to read and control minds. He also has super strength and the ability to shapeshift, and the ability to become intangible and phase through objects, making him a very difficult hero to defeat. For many years, Martian Manhunter had a psychosomatic weakness to fire that would cause him to lose the use of his powers and be burned. This weakness is kind of a problem when you consider how many superhero battles result in buildings or cars catching on fire, but what I want to focus on is a lesser known weakness, his cookie addiction. In Martian Manhunter Volume 2, number 24, we learn that John has developed an intense love of Choco's cookies, the DC equivalent to Oreos. When Blue Beetle and Booster Gold decide to play a prank on him by stealing his cookies and buying all the Chocos in a mile radius, we learn that when Martian Manhunter goes too long without his fix, he becomes a mindless Hulk-like creature who angrily smashes up the city, screaming about how he needs his cookies. His rampage isn't stopped until Booster Gold and Blue Beetle lead him to a warehouse full of Chocos where he greedily begins to devour them. Once Manhunter is back to normal, Batman discovers that the chemicals in Chocos, though relatively harmless to human biology, are extremely addictive to Martian physiologies. So yeah, fire is a bad weakness, but a cookie dependency issue is way worse.
Number 3, Green Lantern. Alan Scott used to have a hilarious weakness, similar to someone else on our list actually. Let me know in the comments when and if you figure out who I'm talking about here. Alan Scott had a weakness to wood. The explanation for why and how this weakness developed was explained later by the fact that Alan was snuck up on and basically attacked using a wooden club. Sort of, and as a result he subconsciously manifested this as a weakness of his, due to him mistaking it for one when in reality, you know, it just hurts to get smacked by a piece of wood because that just hurts. Thankfully, Alan Scott has overcome this, and this strange weakness that was actually originally tied to being the hero Green Lantern in the comics no longer bothers Alan or any other Green Lanterns for that matter.
Number 2, Mon-El and Lead. One day when Superman was just a young Superboy, he looked to the sky and saw a crashing rocket. He intercepted it and discovered a young man inside with a locket from Clark's Kryptonian parents, Jor-El and Lara Lor-Van, wishing him luck on his travels. The young man had suffered amnesia, but the fact that he had the same powers as Superboy led Clark to deduce that this was his long-lost brother from Krypton. He named him Mon-El, and the two began fighting crime together while enjoying their newfound sense of family. However, Superboy soon became suspicious of his new brother, as Krypto didn't seem to recognize him, and his belt was made from a metal not found on Krypton's periodic table. As he did a lot in the Silver Age, Clark began putting Mon-El through a series of elaborate and convoluted tests to prove he was an imposter. He took a bunch of lead balls and painted them green before throwing them into space. He then went to a nearby planet with Mon-El to play baseball. When the green balls showed up, Superboy pretended they were kryptonite meteors and pretended to be affected. When Mon-El also began acting sick, Clark took this as proof that he was an imposter, but as Mon-El's amnesia wore off, he revealed that he was actually from the planet Daxam and had met Jor-El on his travels. As a Daxamite, he had the same powers as Superboy, but really did have a vulnerability to lead. While a Kryptonian would return to full health when kryptonite was removed, a Daxamite exposed to lead was doomed to a slow and painful death. Superboy was forced to put Mon-El in the Phantom Zone until he could find a cure. Mon-El has had a few adventures since then as a member of the Legion of Superheroes, but the fact that he could be killed by a relatively common element is pretty dumb. Number 1. Aquaman gets dehydrated. As the son of a human and an Atlantean, Arthur Curry is capable of some pretty astounding feats. He is able to survive underwater and swim at incredible speeds. He has super strength and expert fighting skills, as well as the ability to control the oceans when wielding the Trident of Poseidon. Oh, and he can also talk to and control fish, an ability that might seem lame until he attacks you with a Megalodon. However, he also has a weakness that is pretty silly. If Aquaman doesn't go back in the water every hour, he begins to grow weak and dehydrated. The severity of this weakness depends on who is writing the comic and what continuity you're in, but the Silver Age version of this character was particularly vulnerable. A great example of this is in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen number 115, when Jimmy developed the same powers as Aquaman. A villain impersonating Superman was able to trick Aquaman and Jimmy into entering a competition where they stayed out of the water for an hour and then crawled through the desert trying not to die, as the fake Superman taunted them with a pitcher of water. For those wondering, Jimmy won the competition and was made the new king of Atlantis. After they defeated the villain, he ceded the throne back to Aquaman, but the fact that Jimmy beat him in a nefarious but fair competition, and by rights is the true king of Atlantis, makes you realize why Aquaman has so much trouble being taken seriously.
Number 10. Spider-Man. Spider-Man is generally known for being one of the most powerful and most iconic heroes out there, but even he has his weaknesses. In fact, while many of them are not as famous as he is, some of them are pretty ridiculous, including his weakness to ethyl chloride, something that also slows and weakens spiders in the natural world. So if you were ever wondering if there might be a bug spray that you could use to fight against Spider-Man, the answer is actually kinda yes. Although make sure you bring a big spray can of ethyl chloride, as he is a lot bigger than your average spider. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you are loving what we are doing here at Top 10 Nerd, why not hit that subscribe button? It really helps us out and you get more of our content, so yay! Number 9. Superman. Superman is a character that we generally associate with strength, but not often weakness, which is interesting considering that he actually has quite a few weaknesses, probably the weirdest among them being magic. The best way to defeat Superman would simply be to become a magic user, because against them he becomes kinda powerless. When it comes to the explanation for why, a lot of people's theories surrounding this have to do with the fact that Superman's powers are naturally occurring, not magic based themselves, although this is usually used as a means to weaken him in the comics, as he doesn't have a natural means to defend against magic, and it's one of the few things, like kryptonite, that his invulnerability does not protect him from. In fact, narratively speaking, this is likely why he was made weak to magic to begin with, to help give him more to struggle against as a character, as he's kinda OP usually. Number 8. Rogue. Rogue was one of my favorite characters growing up, and I think what I loved about her so much was the tragedy of her story and her powers. But what's even more, I love the way that Rogue overcame them. Still, this would be a terrible weakness to have, or have had, so that's why I'm including Rogue on our list. Rogue's powers allow her to adopt the powers of whoever she comes into physical contact with, actually taking their powers for herself, basically draining them. But that's not all Rogue takes with her touch. She can also take your memories and drain your life force. Or, at least, you know, she could do that. Rogue has since overcome this weakness by facing her fears. As it turns out, it was her own subconscious that was basically making it manifest.
Number 7. Black Canary if she gets a sore throat. Dinah Lance is the second hero to use the alias of Black Canary, with her mother being the first. While her mother was limited to being a capable hand-to-hand fighter and being able to train canaries to do amazing feats, her daughter has the ability to unleash the powerful canary cry. How she manages this varies depending on the continuity, with it sometimes being a byproduct of a wizard's curse, and sometimes being due to her carrying the metahuman gene. But what the power does remains consistent. The canary cry allows Dinah to control her vocal cords to generate a powerful sonic attack that can deafen her opponents, and when she really lets loose, can destroy metal and even kill people. However, she needs to be in good vocal health to achieve this, and if she ever has laryngitis, she is unable to unleash the canary cry. However, even without the cry, she is one of the best martial artists in the DC universe, so she still manages okay.
Number 6. Nightcrawler. Well, Nightcrawler is a super powerful character overall, and an iconic and amazing character as well. He isn't actually the most powerful teleporter. This has to do with his weird restrictions and weaknesses surrounding teleportation. The big one being that he can only teleport by a max distance of about, I believe, 2 miles at a time. The other main one being the more that he teleports, the more exhausted he gets, and Kurt as a teleporter can tire fairly quickly if he's forced to make multiple jumps, which if he has to go far, he kind of has to do because each jump he can only go so far. Kurt does teleport through the Brimstone dimension, which I saw some people in the comics bringing up as like a super powerful thing, but this is actually more how his teleportation skills work. It's not necessarily something he's choosing to do, as he has to travel through the Brimstone dimension to get where he's going. So while yes, he can travel interdimensionally, it's only one dimension, and it's not really by choice, it's more by design. However, Kurt is an amazing character because of his limitations. That's what makes him so great. It means that when Kurt has to push it to save the day, and he often of course does just that because he really is a hero, he's often putting his life on the line for ideals he believes in, or for all of Earth or all of life itself, whatever he's defending. That's why we love Kurt. Number 5. Green Lantern. Hal Jordan is Green Lantern, or one of the Green Lanterns anyways, and as a Green Lantern he has a pretty iconic and ridiculous weakness, or at least for a very long time in the comics he did have that weakness. Hal had a weakness to the color yellow. In fact, all Green Lanterns did for a while. This was as a result of parallax existing within the Green Lantern Corps' central battery. Having the entity of fear within the battery caused all Green Lanterns to develop a weakness to yellow, something that was used in All-Star Batman and Robin and Frank Miller's alternate reality to weaken and torment Hal Jordan's Green Lantern. In the All-Star Batman and Robin comic, Batman and Robin basically paint themselves and an entire safe house yellow, just to teach Hal a lesson about meddling in Batman's affairs. Number 4. Black Cat. Black Cat is an anti-hero over at Marvel Comics, who is generally known for being an ally and sometimes romantic partner of Spider-Man. While she typically is shown as being a skilled thief with acrobatic skills and superb training and experience as a fighter, at least that's how she was depicted initially, she doesn't usually have any superpowers to speak of. However, at one point, she did just have straight up powers, and this happened for Black Cat when the Kingpin granted her wish of getting them. However, because this was the Kingpin, it of course did not work out exactly as Felicia had planned. She ended up with bad luck powers, which were extremely useful when fighting an enemy, but not so useful when with an ally or anyone else, as they actually affected not just her opponents, but like anyone who was close to her, which means that Peter suffered from them as well. To make matters worse, Felicia kept her powers a secret from him, which ended up driving a wedge between the two when it came to their romantic and working relationships with one another.
Number 3. Domino suffers from electorophobia. Nina Thurman has the mutant ability to subconsciously manipulate probability when she finds herself in stressful or dangerous situations in order to give herself the best possible outcome. In simpler terms, she's extremely lucky. If she is shot at, she will instinctively know exactly the right way to duck and dodge her way past the bullets, or the enemy's gun might simply jam. She can make the highly improbable happen in order to survive almost any situation, and it has made her a very difficult character to defeat, but not impossible. In Deadpool Volume 4, Number 17, the Merc with a Mouth is planning on assassinating one of the X-Men's most vocal critics in order to earn a place on the team. The X-Men of course do not want to be embroiled in this kind of scandal and send Domino to deal with Deadpool. She ties him to a bed and the two talk, with Wade confessing that he is terrified of cows and Domino revealing that she is terrified of chickens. You'd think she was kidding or lying, but later in the issue when Deadpool escapes and goes after the target again, Domino and Wolverine chase after him only to be taken out of commission when crawling through an air vent when they end up face to face with a chicken. Domino is paralyzed with fear and unable to continue on, which delays her and Wolverine long enough for Deadpool to get away. Considering how much poultry seems to affect her, Domino is lucky she doesn't come across them more often.
Number 2. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is a super interesting character. On one hand, she's extremely powerful and can never lose. She can even potentially have her power utilized to manipulate the stakes of other competitions that she's pulled into. However, this also implies that there are times when she has zero control over her powers, in the sense that she cannot influence the result of an unbalanced battle. In fact, her powers will pull her to serve the side that will be victorious, regardless of whether or not she wants to, in terms of what her mind or her heart is saying to her. This has meant that Iska has been forced to turn her back on her own people, the mutants of Arakko, more than once. She has also had to fight against family, colleagues, and friends before as a result. Although the one thing she can control at times is kind of how she approaches the fighting part of, the battle. Meaning that if she has the option, she can try to fight others involved as opposed to those that she is specifically close to. Like during her fight against Planet Arakko and the Great Ring, when she was teleported away to the planet's ocean by Nightcrawler and chose to stay there fighting the planet's creatures in the name of Uranos and the Eternals, as opposed to fighting her own people directly, or continuing to fight them directly. Number 1. Power Girl. Power Girl probably has one of the weirdest weaknesses around. Despite being a Kryptonian who is on the level of Superman when it comes to her powers and her strength, she can easily be harmed simply if you use organic materials to hurt her. You know that saying about sticks and stones, which may break your bones? Well, for Power Girl, despite having super durability and invulnerability, this is true. Sticks and stones could break her bones, but industrial steel probably wouldn't hurt her for some reason. Raw organic materials, which have been unprocessed, are revealed to be a weakness of Power Girl's in Supergirl issue number 16 from the 1996 series. Power Girl shares this revelation with her alternate self from the main continuity at the time, who was shocked by the revelation. Which, I mean, fair enough, I would be too if I were Linda Danvers, who was Supergirl at that time. However, I will say I don't think that Kara has this weakness anymore in the comics, thank goodness, but in the 90s, it was a thing, and it was there for some reason.
At number 10, Zombify the Host. Symbiotes like Venom pose a significant challenge to Marvel's heroes, but exploring their weaknesses is crucial. Take Venom's vulnerability if bonded with a zombified host. You see, when Eddie succumbs to the undead state in Marvel Zombies, the symbiote weakens, its own demise accelerated due to this unnatural pairing. The situation unveils a terrifying possibility. A zombified Venom, a hybrid threat capable of global infection before its ultimate demise. Marvel's recent King in Black event amplified public fear of symbiotes, sparking interest in eradicating them. Though strategies like symbiote bombs have been considered, a potential zombie virus remains kind of a risky alternative. It could eliminate symbiotes, but it risks cataclysmic consequences, potentially dooming the world. The concept of turning Venom's host into a zombie to destroy the symbiotes is pretty intriguing. However, the catastrophic fallout outweighs any benefit. This potential strategy, while seemingly effective, would spiral into an apocalypse. The realm of ethical choices, unleashing a global threat isn't really a smart move, regardless of its tempting power over the lethal protector. At number 9 is Venom's webbing. When we talk about symbiotes and their weaknesses, it's not just sound or fire, so let's delve deeper about these lesser known vulnerabilities. Take for instance, the excessive use of certain abilities. You see, Venom's unique skill to shoot webbing isn't without consequence. While Spider-Man might manufacture his webbing separately, Venom's substance is integral to his being, which serves as both his body and a web shooting agent. It's a double-edged sword because overusing it actually depletes his symbiote mass, weakening his overall form. Imagine if heroes exploited this lesser-known weakness, like causing Venom to shoot so many webs that he eventually depletes all of his venomous mass. If you're enjoying this video so far, you could support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 are the Poisons. The Poisons are a separate alien race which hold a unique and terrifying sway over the symbiotes. You see here, the term Poisons isn't about toxic substances, but refers to a collective of other symbiotes more menacing and formidable than the infamous Clintar. These entities have a compelling power that comes from their hive mind structure, enabling them to communicate and act as a unified force. But what makes the Poisons particularly threatening is their ability to infiltrate and subjugate other symbiotes, a risk they pose when they set their sights on Earth. Their interaction with established symbiotes like Venom raises the stakes to an unprecedented level. Upon bonding with the symbiote such as Venom, the Poisons can seize control of both the symbiote and its host, manipulating them both at will. This potential to assimilate symbiotes and hosts alike, compounded by their talent for impersonation and overarching goal of expansion, presents a looming danger across the multiverse. The Poison's ability to co-opt powerful symbiotes, potentially turning them against their will, sets the stage for widespread chaos and conflict of cosmic proportions. At number 7 is electricity. In the alternate Marvel Ultimate Universe, the portrayal of Venom takes a significant detour from the classic extraterrestrial symbiote we all know and love. See here, Venom is not an alien organism, but a man-made synthetic invention originally crafted to combat cancer. The striking divergence lies in its design, as it's specifically coded to merge genetically with the person it's intended for. Once the suit is worn, it integrates with the host. However, there's an intriguing aspect which arises in its vulnerabilities. If portions of the suit are separate and worn by incompatible individuals, they act as contagious agents, passing on the suit's properties. Yet here lies a peculiar weakness inherent in the suit, as it is susceptible to electricity. Small pieces can be eliminated by an electric shock, while the entire suit can be disabled, albeit requiring a more substantial electrical charge as the size of the piece increases. This adds a fresh layer of complexity to the Venom's weakness in the alternate universe. At number 6 is adrenaline. You know that thrill you get from being on a roller coaster or when you're in a nail-biting situation? That rush is called adrenaline. And here's the kicker. For Venom, it's not just a thrill, it's a necessity. You see, the Clintar, Venom species, thrive on this stuff. They feed on the adrenaline our bodies produce, and in some versions of the story, they bond with hosts until they drain them completely of this hormone. Eddie Brock, Venom's human host, had a unique situation. You see, his cancer threw his adrenaline production out of whack, making him an ideal long-term host for the symbiote. But here's the thing, heroes rarely, if ever, exploit this weakness. Imagine if they could manipulate or deplete the adrenaline of a host, potentially weakening the symbiote significantly. It's an untapped strategy in the superhero playbook, one that could potentially alter the fate of battles against these formidable foes. At number 5 are the xenophages. In the vast landscape of superhero battles, there exist adversaries like the xenophages that could pose a significant threat to even the mightiest symbiotes. Imagine this, these beings born in 90s comics present a unique challenge for symbiotes as Venom once discovered. You see, the xenophages, resembling colossal insects, wield saliva packed with a paralyzing neurotoxin, a formidable weapon that targets symbiotes specifically, and their primary sustenance are symbiote brains. Once their saliva touches the symbiote, it's instant paralysis, leaving the host in a vulnerable state. It's like having a weakness that exposes the hero's soft underbelly. What's more is that these creatures aren't just hunters. They're connoisseurs, with their saliva enhancing the flavor of their meal. Think of it as a built-in seasoning, making their feast even more delectable. At number 4 is Styx' touch. There's a lesser-known character in Marvel named Styx, and let me tell you, he is a game changer. Styx' story is pretty tragic. He got wrapped up in some experimental mess, and now his whole body is like a walking, talking cancer. The eerie thing about Styx is his touch. It's not your casual high five, it's lethal. When he makes skin-to-skin contact, it's like a rapid and devastating chain reaction. He breaks down living matter quicker than you can blink. Even Venom, with his regenerative powers and tough exterior, isn't immune to Styx' touch. It won't annihilate Venom, but will definitely throw a wrench in his game. Just imagine the possibilities if our heroes decided to leverage Styx' ability against these seemingly invincible symbiotes. It could flip the whole narrative, introducing an entirely new strategy into the superhero playbook. At number 3 is Peter Parker. One often disregarded aspect is the emotional bond between the symbiote and its host. Consider Venom, for example. His weakness extends beyond the stereotypical sonic waves or fiery attacks. It's his profound emotional tie, especially towards Peter Parker. This connection, forged during their initial partnership, remains pivotal. When Peter Parker eventually severed that bond in the comics, it left an enduring impact on Venom. His attachment to Peter not only clouds his judgment, but also hinders his combat abilities. It's an overlooked facet revealing that vulnerabilities aren't solely physical. Emotions and relationships wield significant influence, even in the superpowered realm of conflicts and showdowns. At number 2 is Rage. Deep within the expansive Marvel universe resides an ancient and formidable entity named Null, a pivotal force in the creation of the Clintar, the home world of the symbiotes and their intricate society. Null commands an extraordinary influence over the collective consciousness of the Clintar, steering these symbiotic beings towards a precarious condition known as bloodlust, or rage if that gets demonetized. This intense and often uncontrollable desire for combat and chaos predominantly arises when Null asserts control or when the symbiotes endure exposure to unstable hosts or corruption. This corruption can manifest due to exposure to diverse pathogens or the adoption of behaviors that disrupt the symbiote's equilibrium. The consequential rage leads to an erratic behavior in the symbiotes like Venom, causing them to defy the wishes of their human hosts and potentially resulting in hazardous, unpredictable, and high-stakes scenarios. At number 1 is My Fire mixtape. Firstly, its susceptibility to sound waves, particularly high-frequency or intensely loud noises, presents a significant vulnerability. This was stumbled upon by none other than Spider-Man in the fateful encounter with the church bell tower. The resonating toil of bells commanded the symbiote's separation, unveiling its vulnerability to sound. Equally impactful is the symbiote's enduring weakness against fire, a trait prevalent since its early comic book days. Peter Parker exploited this flaw when he first donned the symbiote as a suit. Employing a combination of sound waves and fire, he managed to sever the bond and then manipulate the symbiote's movement using fire as a tool. This ultimately led to containing the symbiote within a glass container. Understanding these often overlooked weaknesses provides us a deeper insight into combating this complex and powerful entity. It emphasizes the importance of strategic thinking and exploiting vulnerabilities rather than relying solely on physical strength when facing such formidable foes. As always, if there's a symbiote weakness you think I've missed, feel free to let me know down in the comments. This has been AJ Spatola with Top 10 Nerd, and I'll catch you all in another video. Later, nerds!